I admit it, folks, I love the Confederate flag. Absolutely love the Confederate flag. Hello, everyone. This is Voice of the Composer. Welcome back to my video series. You know how we do it here. We keep it raw. We keep it real. There's no pretty boy camera angles. Just talk about a love of writing music as amateur composers. And today we're going to tackle this very controversial issue regarding the Confederate flag. This all came about from my previous video. In that video, I was talking about different events in your life that prevent you from trying to complete whatever musical projects you're working on. And that all came about because I'm trying to complete this piece, Robinson Crusoe, a symphonic poem for a string quartet. In the middle of that, plus this COVID-19 scare, I had a pipe go in my apartment. Water went everywhere, complete mess. So the landlord's got to come in and reduce some of the piping. But in that video, I happened to feature a Confederate or Rebel flag hanging on my wall. And guess what, folks? That flag is still hanging there proudly today, and it's not coming down. Is that because I'm a KKK member? No. Do I believe in racism, sexism, or homophobia? Absolutely not. Do I want to see a return to slavery or segregation? No. And 99.9% of the people out there who own this flag feel the same way I do. Do you know that there are black people who own this flag? There are Hispanics that own this flag? Wait a minute, blacks and Hispanics that own this flag? Yes, because there were black Confederate soldiers and there were Mexican Confederate soldiers. Did you know that? True story. Go look it up if you don't believe me. A little perspective. In 1890, there was a city ordinance passed in San Francisco that required all of its Chinese citizens to move within 6 months to another part of the city. If they did not do so, they'd be arrested or imprisoned. 1931, California State Code restricted the marriage between whites and Asians. Now, if that isn't racist, or if that isn't racism, I don't know what is. Maybe we should start demanding that the California state flag be taken down because of all the abuses against the Chinese in that state or the Asians in that state. 1927, there was a racially restrictive housing law passed in Chicago. Perhaps we should demand that the Illinois state flag be taken down. In Massachusetts, in the 1840s, early 1850s, you had Jim Crow-like laws being passed in Boston, Salem, and Nantucket that segregated the schools. Well, wait a minute. Jim Crow-like laws in Massachusetts in the 1840s, 1850s? Well, that's probably about, 15 years, maybe 20 years before this flag was created? So we're starting to shatter this myth, aren't we, that this flag is somehow racist, sexist, homophobic. Oh, well, the KKK, they carry this flag. Well, correction. The KKK actually has rejected this flag and has their own flag. Now, it might be some form of this flag, but it is not this flag. I've done the research on that. Trust me, folks. And they've also been seen sporting the American flag. Are you now going to call the American flag racist? Are you going to call the American flag a flag of supremacy? Think about it, folks. Think about it. In order to really understand how this flag came about, we need to understand 19th century life. It was a lot different than today. People didn't work 9 to 5. You're just starting to get the emergence of factories. And a lot of the times those factories were dangerous to work in. You didn't have OSHA or anything like that. In fact, there weren't really any child labor laws, and we know about child labor in those days. Children being required to work long hours. And it was not an easy time for anybody. Not at all. There were diseases such as cholera and syphilis. People didn't have airplanes or automobiles in those days, so life was really hard. And there was a major gap between the classes, especially the middle class and the very poor. There was no in-between. You were either wealthy, middle class, or dirt poor. Example, Victorian England, more specifically Victorian London. You had a place called East London. This is where people on the lowest end of the economic ladder lived. They were living in squalor, cramped spaces, unsanitary conditions. Many of them ended up in what they called workhouses. These were places where people would be required to break apart rocks with hammers for 10 or 12 hours a day. Then they'd be fed this meal called gruel, which was this awful, soupy, oatmeal-type meal, just gross. But that's what they were feeding these people. There was lots of poverty and lots of starvation in East London, and in London in general, in one of the most advanced cities of its time. Well, those issues in London affected us here because we did have immigration from England to this country. Just as the political unrest and unemployment, starvation that was going on in Germany affected us when we had German immigrants come to this country, and a lot of those people ended up in the South. So the issue of slavery would have not really pertained to the average citizen or somebody in the lower classes. But the one thing that the plantation owners and that the people in the lower classes had in common, or the common citizen, was the overtaxation of the North, the trade policies. Remember, the North controlled the waterways. So all those policies, that overtaxation, it trickled down to the lower classes. So it was not an easy time. And regarding slavery, did you know that whether you were freed black or white, if you were a person with wealth, you could buy a plantation or buy land and buy slaves because of the class structure in those days? True story, folks. True story. So why don't we go ahead in time to 1917, World War I. There was major anti-German sentiment in this country. You had books written in German that were being pulled from public libraries, anti-German posters. 4,000 Germans were arrested, possibly interned. We know a lot of them were beaten in the streets. They had their dogs kicked. They were called Kraut. Yeah, huge anti-German sentiment, World War I. Then in World War II, 11,500 Germans were interned alongside the Japanese. An additional 2,500 were required to register with the local post office, carry IDs with them at all times. Then you had 600,000 Italian immigrants during World War II, which were screened or surveilled. 250 of them were put in internment camps alongside the Japanese. Then there was an additional 425,000 German soldiers that were put in over 700 POW camps here in the United States. Just imagine that. 425,000 German soldiers being put in over 700 POW camps here in the United States. And I'm sure some people got caught up in the mix, or were in the mix there, that had nothing to do with what was going on in Germany at the time. And those abuses happened under the American flag, not under the Confederate flag. You also have the same issue with the Scottish or Irish that came to this country, the Polish, the Czechs, and as I mentioned before, abuses against the Asians. And of course, Native Americans under the Union or American flag. So which flag really is a racist flag? If you're still not convinced, 1890 to 1910, there were several laws passed in the South by 10 of the 11 former Confederate states that affected not only blacks, but tens of thousands of poor whites. And these required literacy tests, residency tests. There were some poll taxes. There was a grandfather clause put in there somewhere, but it was later found unconstitutional. But those were policies that affected white people in the South. So once again, is this flag racist, sexist, homophobic? The people who own it, do they really want to return to slavery or Jim Crow? So when I take a step back and I look at all the abuses committed against these groups under the American flag, I take a look at the Confederate flag, I think I'm going to side with the Confederate flag. Now, don't get me wrong, I love the American flag. I love being an American. But I know what these Southerners were fighting for back in the day, and it wasn't necessarily slavery. Like I said, there are a lot of people in the South that did not have money. Most of them were not rich. And if you think that this flag is all about sexism, racism, or what have you, take a look at the Jamaican national flag. What symbol do you see on that flag today? Well, it's the same one here, the saltire, St. Andrew's Cross. Go check it out if you don't believe me. And we know slavery existed in Jamaica. Now, a little side note, for a little history about this flag. Go and check out the story about the Republic of West Florida. Very, very interesting story. I'll give you a short synopsis or quick synopsis. This was back in 1810. The Spanish had invaded and conquered what we know, or controlled what we now know as Louisiana, and more specifically the area of Baton Rouge. And at that time, you had English and American settlers that were trying to set up a colony. And they kept getting attacked by the Spanish. They were under Spanish control. They asked for the U.S. government's help, but the government refused because they were in failed negotiations with Spain. So the settlers decided to rebel and form what was known as the Republic of West Florida. Lasted for 76 days. Out of that came the Bonnie Blue flag. That's a blue flag with one white star, and that is the earliest stages to this flag here. So go back and check your history, folks. Is this flag really sexist, racist, homophobic, or what have you? You decide. Let me know in the comments below. You enjoy the video, click that like button, subscribe, hit me up on Instagram at #JasonComposes, or leave comments below. This is Voice of the Composer saying peace out. I'll see you next time.